Now, state lose some of its territory, it may cross the border. Again, there is a gap, normative gap. If there's a conflict, either because of environmental, a conflict in natural resources, or somehow a government degrades the environment as part of the conflict, even throwing the Agent Orange, I guess, in Vietnam many years ago, may lead to people moving, but they are covered by ordinary IDP refugee law. So that even though environment may be involved, they can be still covered under the existing law. And then finally, this restricted use, the example I gave in Sri Lanka, the reason I say it may be temporary is because people may ignore the law or ignore the policy and move there anyway, move back to their homes, which often happens with resettlement, or the move may be permanent. As well, the government may change the policy, as it did in Sri Lanka, because of the public resentment and upheaval, so people can move back and forwards. Again, it's forced, it's internal, national law applies, there's a normative gap. One other thing I really want to say about resettlement, from my experience working on it at ADB and also from the literature, is at least in development projects, resettlement doesn't work. I mean, there's been a new recent academic study by the previous head of the World Bank on resettlement, saying, let me rephrase that. Resettlement has many problems, and often people end up worse. Not because anyone wants them to end up worse. We're really still, as I think the resettlement community, the world resettlement community, is still struggling with how to make this work. And so I think we need to keep it in mind in terms of making sure and understanding that resettlement has its complications, may send people into impoverishment. So we need to have the safeguards in place before we propose resettlement as a solution. Having said that, I personally think that in some cases we also can waste too much money on adaptation efforts or on rebuilding seawalls for Tuvalu. Like, I mean, we've had scientific reports saying it's going to go under. It will happen within this next, different people say different things, 2050, 2090, but everyone is convinced that it happens within this century. So at what point, and I think it really obviously, as we have to have a participatory process and the people themselves have to decide, given all the facts and educated about all the facts. But I think sometimes when you look at all the facts, resettlement may be the only option. So together, I think that's another community besides the existing community that we need to bridge more in thinking about climate migration and these issues. And for the record, I will say that resettlement has its problems, and the recent academic studies have said that it doesn't work. Can we, yeah. Okay, so just recapping the gaps we've just considered. You know what, I think we've done that enough. Next. Okay, so this is very important for everyone here. What are the implications for policies and legislation? So just recapping, climate change is likely to trigger or exacerbate temporary or permanent displacement, and it'll affect large numbers of people. Persons forcibly displaced are very vulnerable. And we need action at the national level and the international level. And I would argue you also need to think about a bit more at the regional level. Instead of Tuvalu and Kiribati talking just but individually negotiating with Australia and New Zealand, they should work more with and they do to some extent, but the OASIS, the Association of Small Island Developing States, but they're not taking these issues to the same extent through OASIS. And similarly, I think other regional groupings, ASEAN, you're together, you have similar problems, and not only that, your neighbours. So if there is a disaster, your neighbour is next door and might get your people. So it's worth looking at that. Actually, one interesting thing I learnt recently that I hadn't been aware of is that India has built it's supposed to be finished now, built a large wall, or a large fence to stop Bangladeshis coming in, which it's trying to stop Bangladeshis coming in now, but will be effective also for climate migrants and environmental refugees as well. So